Having SRS, a vaginoplasty in my case, is a big undertaking, and it therefore may be difficult for you to know if it's right for you. So today I wanted to talk about why I didn't want SRS at first, why I wasn't sure if it was right for me at first, but then I came to the realization that it was absolutely what I needed for my mental well-being. As many of you know, I recently talked about how I'm still very happy 3 years after having my SRS, despite some mild issues and again considering a revision. I won't go into all that again here since I've talked about that very recently, but rather I wanted to go into my process of going from this isn't for me to this is a critical part of my journey toward being me. Before I started my transition, having a vaginoplasty wasn't even on my radar. I was still discovering the language, words like transgender, or rather finally becoming more comfortable with the realization that this word fit me, that this described my experience. When I started my transition in about September of 2014, I had hardly explored what it meant to be trans, let alone what any of my options were for social and medical transition. I'm just realizing that I can transition. I'm just realizing that, oh, I can live my life as a woman. Yeah, those other pieces haven't fallen into place yet. As I've mentioned in the past, I quickly found that therapy was a good place to start. Let's figure out the shit that's been bouncing around in my head for 24 years. Probably a good idea. Once I started allowing myself to start being myself, to start finally exploring Chloe, the gender dysphoria did get worse. And that's not because it was just like, boom, dysphoria is suddenly there. It's because I was finally unpacking it, finally no longer ignoring it. It was like a persistent, dull disconnection and dissatisfaction from so many things. From my body, to my relationships, to my gender, to my life. This dissatisfaction and discomfort and disconnection that I always knew was there. And it got stronger, at least momentarily, because I had to bring it into the light of day in order to figure out how to make it more manageable. I worked through that cover of shame and guilt that I used for so many years. And guilt and shame is protecting me from exploring that further because that's difficult and scary to go into that place of like, oh, maybe I'm different. Maybe I need to do something about it. If I never explore it, then I don't ever need to do anything about it. And I say all of these things because, among other things, this is when I started to have a better understanding of, for one, why I didn't really enjoy sex, why I never really enjoyed sex, and started having a better understanding that I didn't like having sex as a man, and just generally did not like having a penis, which I think is the more important piece here. There's a part of me that I realize I identify as demisexual, and that's part of the factor of not liking sex, but it was also the factor of having sex as a man, as being the man in a relationship, as just showing up in the world as a man, and part of that came with having a penis. And I'm not equating being a man to having a penis. Those are obviously two different things, but being assigned male at birth and being forced into that role of being a man, all of that came with all of these pieces that intersected with one another. And at this point in time, the pieces were finally starting to fall into place where I was allowed to be myself more and more with each passing day. I quickly started uncovering all these things that I was ignoring for years, all these things that I actually really hated. Started tucking because I didn't like my penis. I found very quickly that I fucking hated tucking. Does anybody even like tucking? The process of tucking sucks, but I hated it so much more if I felt like anybody could see the bulge. Not tucking? That almost didn't even feel like an option. Such an uncomfortable process having to do that over and over again. After months of finally being able to acknowledge and process the underlying discomfort, this is when I started to realize that vaginoplasty was an option and started to consider this option. But the thought of having such an intense surgery made me shy away from wanting SRS at first. The thought of going under anesthesia freaks me out. Thankfully, not as much today after having several surgeries, but back in 2014, 2015, even 2016, and before that as well, that was a much different story. But there was another, probably even more important component here that made me hesitant to pursue SRS. My partner. My partner at the time did not want me to give up my penis. We remained together for about 15 months at the start of my transition, and we had been together for over a year by the start of my transition as well, and we wanted to try to make things work. And at first, I thought I was okay with trying to stomach the discomfort of having a penis if it would make my partner happy and if it would help our relationship in some way, like the sexually intimate part of our relationship. Then another important problem arose. Being sexually intimate, something I never really enjoyed, but it got so much harder for me after unpacking all these parts of myself. By mid-2015, I knew that our relationship was not gonna last forever, and I was realizing that I don't think I would ever be comfortable being sexually intimate with someone if I kept my penis. If I didn't go through with SRS. In many ways, my SRS was as much about getting a vagina as it was about getting rid of my penis. There's a lot more to this internal conflict and coming to this decision, obviously. But long story short, I realized that this was another part of my life where I needed to prioritize what was best for me. Starting my transition, giving myself the permission to transition, sounds cheesy, but this was an act of self-love. Probably one of the first major acts of self-love I had done my entire life. And I realized that I needed to continue taking steps to feel as comfortable and authentic in my body as I could. And after all, this is my body. I have to live in it 24/7, so I need to make the choices that are best for me and not put my own needs aside for others when it comes to these sorts of things. And I think things became even more clear in 2016. I had been single since November 2015 because, me and my partner, we sadly broke up after 2.5 years because it just wasn't going to work out. I've talked about that in other videos, but, a big piece was sexually intimate piece, and she wasn't a lesbian. In a weird way, that kind of validated my identity. But I was continuing to focus on myself more and more, especially once I was single. I joined several personal growth groups that really helped me on my journey. This is around the time that I first did the vagina monologues too. I really started to share my story, share my journey, really started to get invested in the community, and part of that process was getting invested in myself. I was more directly confronting all of my unmet needs. I realized how much of my life I was living for others and not for myself. I dated on and off during this year too, during 2016. Never got into a very serious relationship, but this is my first time dating as my most authentic self. And I really encountered this problem again of not being able to be intimate with myself or with others, because not without breaking down crying halfway through. And on top of it, still just feeling so uncomfortable in my body in general. 2016 was just this year of constant reminders that I needed SRS. I needed it for me. And despite those fears of having surgery, I realized that I needed to move forward with taking those very scary steps that would eventually allow me to really live my life. I think in the grand scheme of things, my transition journey was pretty quick actually. I was able to access a lot of things. I did a lot of research and figured out these are the things I want to do. Really planned it out. But after the floodgates had opened in therapy, after starting HRT and the psychological changes and eventually physical changes that came with that, after finally putting myself first, the pieces fell into place and I realized what I needed to do. One of the big reasons I wanted to share this is to let you know that you don't have to have it all figured out at first. You shouldn't expect yourself to be like, alright, I'm transitioning, every other piece is figured out. That's overwhelming as shit and just not realistic. If you have doubts about certain parts of transitioning, that's fine and that's perfectly normal. With time, you'll get clarity on what steps are right for you and maybe what steps other people do that aren't right for you. There is no one right way to transition. I've said this, a lot of other people say this, but I think it's important to remind yourself of that, especially if you're early in your journey or even still in the closet. It is a journey. It is your journey. It's a unique journey. Give it time and the pieces that are right for you will fall into place. What are your thoughts on what I have shared here? If you've had SRS, how and when did you realize that it was right for you? If you're considering SRS, where are you in your process? Are you leaning toward having SRS? Why or why not? I'd love to hear it all in the comments down below. And as always, Tipsy and I love you all and hope you're staying as safe and healthy as possible during these tough times. If you have not done so already, please be sure to give this a big thumbs up and hit that subscribe button and notification bell. Again, I love you all. Bye for now.